So the last argument that my wife and I got into was actually over a diaper rash, of all things, right? And I'll admit that she does most of the diapers. And I happened to be watching, and I made a comment about the diaper rash. Are you sure we're taking care of that? Are do you need a little more of this stuff? And you could visibly see, and I was trying to be helpful. Uh, I think these are those little innocuous things that grate on us as partners. And talk a little bit about what was going on in our relationship. And you've seen this a million different times, and you created this amazing system to try to help couples with situations like this. So Eve, tell us a little bit about this fair play thing that you've been doing.
Well, I love Zach that you're now I'm now roping you in, right, to be like a professional beta tester. But what thank you for having me, first of all, I want to say. And we've talked before about the synergies in our work. How I work very closely in the research that is rooted in fair play is actually very much rooted in the research of psychology, as well as behavior design and law and behavioral economics. But psychology really is a really big piece of it, and working closely with um, professors and departments of psychology, researchers who consider themselves positive psychologists, and of course, a panoply of wonderful LCSWs, and PhDs, and everybody who is in the coaching and therapy world. So I want to just thank you and your discipline for helping be a cultural warrior in this. So what I think is happening when you're doing the diaper rash is very similar, I'm sure, to how you feel in your world as a therapist, which is that the presenting problem is not the real problem.
Hmm.
And I think the home becomes so dangerous, Zach, because we literally think we're divorcing over a sponge that was left in the sink, or that you can't take it anymore because your partner keeps leaving their clothes on the floor. But really, what this is, and we'll talk more and dig into what fair play is about, but this really is about accountability and trust. And when you start losing accountability and trust in a relationship or an organization, which is how our work dovetails so beautifully, I work on accountability and trust in organizations.
Mhm.
And many therapists work in accountability and trust, rebuilding that or building a solid foundation for that in relationships. And so there's a lot of overlap, I would say, in our work, but that's what this comes down to. What it comes down to is that in our most important organization, which is our home, we often lose accountability and trust because assumptions, even though we are, you as a thoughtful discipline, and same thing as me as a lawyer who is used to structured decision making instead of assumptions, that gendered assumptions, those gendered assumptions, even for single parents and LGBTQIA couples, nobody can escape sort of this hetero cisgender assumptions that have shaped most of our lives, especially in the developing world, in the world, and in America.
Mhm. We're, therapists, and thanks for your appreciation of our field. We've got thousands of therapists watching right
Yes.
now, and we'll watch the replay. And we're dealing with clients, and even in our own lives, we may be in dyads at home. We have domestic partners and spouses and all of that. And most of us, I would say, have two careers too. And so there's just this constant question of whose career is more important, which career do we move for, who does the housework, who does this, who does that, who's going to pay the bills. Well, I make more money, so you've got to do more of this. We hear this kind of stuff all the time, even if couples don't say it out loud. These are the kinds of things going on in our relationships, and if we don't know how to navigate them, we're going to be doomed, because you can't just fall on the person who makes the most money. You can't just say, well, the in a hetero relationship, the man's career is maybe more important, and I'll stay home and do the kids and the dishes. So you faced this in your own life. I know we're facing it. Everybody who's
Yes.
watching. And talk a little bit about the system you created that I'm going to do a little product placement here. This fair play thing that my wife and I have been doing.
Mhm.
Talk about this system and the ways it can help therapists when clients come in and talk about these kinds of issues about he doesn't help around the house or she doesn't do this. They don't appreciate my career, blah, 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 blah. Talk about the system you created.
Well, I think what I've heard from, again, from psychologists is that they often call research me search. And that is absolutely the case in my home, Zach. And what I will say is why, again, I feel so closely tied to the professional discipline of therapy is because a lot of the presenting problems come up in therapy. And so, and then what we've also seen is while we're partnering with PESI is because, and you, the psychotherapy networker, is because oftentimes, if you're not aware of the societal implications of women holding the majority of unpaid labor in the world, then you could end up fortifying those assumptions. And we have seen some do no harm where people are coming to us from couples therapy where their therapist said, we're not here to talk about garbage. Let's go to the deeper issues about how you communicate, when really it is about garbage.
Mhm.
Because again, that's about the assumptions versus structured decision making. It's about somebody feeling completely invalidated or losing that accountability and trust in their relationship. So in my own relationship, as you know, Zach, I did not set out to be an expert on the gender division of labor. That was not on my third grade. What do you want to be when you grow up board? It wasn't on my orientation packet when they had to ask what you're interested in when I was in law school. I remember Elizabeth Warren was our orientation professor asking us those questions. I think I had civil rights attorney when I said that, or at least president. I wanted to be president, senator, Nick City dancer. I had a lot of big dreams, and I think what was hard about those big dreams is so many women. I think we think we're going to be smashing glass ceiling after glass ceiling and taking the world by storm because we've been told that we can do anything, and then the realities of life set in. And what those realities do is that instead of smashing glass ceiling, Zach, I ended up smashing, peas for my toddler, Zach, also Zach,
Yeah. Yeah.
while I'm breastfeeding, a baby Ben. And then what happens often is the partnership is not the first thing that erodes. Often the first thing that erodes is the accountability and trust a woman has if she's in a dual earner house with her employer, because what often happens when you have children is the motherhood penalty starts hitting us. So we start getting I got my direct reports taken away from me. You start feeling invalidated in the workplace, and then you start losing your self-worth. And then that affects how you are dealing with it feels even more, things feel even more at stake at home. So then as you unravel the fact that you get abandoned often by your workplace, I remember my workplace said, we have this great place for you to for you to use your breast pump. It's called a broom closet. And so you have that. And then you start to feel really isolated. And then your partner becomes maybe your only lifeline back to your identity and yourself. And then that's a really dangerous place to be because they're often there's feelings of abandonment. That was one of the number one words in our 60,000 person longitudinal study. We keep going and going with our data since 2011.
Mhm.
Abandonment
Mhm.
it is what people feel when they're the ones being asked, where are the diapers? And
Mhm.
so I'll just tell you one more story that was happening to me around the time when I was losing my direct reports at work and feeling very invalidated at my in that the work organization. In my home organization, for my own relationship, I write about this story in Fair Play how my husband Seth sends me a text that said, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. And that presenting problem of I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries was where I ended up crying on the side of the road, thinking my marriage was over. It was over, Zach, because I literally was being defined as the fulfiller of his smoothie needs. And I'm sure he didn't mean that. And it definitely didn't, he did not intend to spark a revolution or a movement around men being invited into more unpaid labor in the home. But that day was such an isolating day for me because I think, like many women, when I was crying on that side of the road on my way to pick up my toddler Zach at his toddler transition program, where, by the way, the name tag that I was given was Zach's mom. So now I'm being erased by my workplace. I'm being erased by my child's institution. They don't even know my name, and this is supposedly my social safety net. But my husband then comes in to deal the fatal blow, which is I'm reminding you that you are the default, the she fault for literally every single household and domestic task for our family. So that is the context. I wanted to give you that context and one more story, because then we can dig into the system, because I know you asked great questions when we were prepping for this, and I really appreciated the nitty gritty of the actual secret formula of behavior design that this is built around. Again, with the huge green stamp of approval from many psychologists, including the Department of Psychology at USC. But one last story I think is really important, because it shows how we can't just blame our partners for doing this to us. We can't just blame this on, okay, well, it's our corporations that don't understand. What we have to understand when we deal with especially clients and women is that this is the story that encapsulates it. But when I was on a breast cancer march, right after I had my blueberries breakdown, Zach, it was the first time I became aware of these dynamics, that, oh, wow, maybe something's happening to me. I didn't realize it was called the second shift, emotional labor, invisible work, terms that had been around since 1970. But I didn't know that. I was Gen X. I was told I could do anything. But I do remember right after my blueberries breakdown, going on a breast cancer march with 9 other women in downtown LA to honor a friend who had been diagnosed. And these are the women that are running things. They are, I had a stroke and trauma doctor. I had an Oscar-winning producer with me on this march. And all 9 of these women, including myself, we had this beautiful Saturday morning. And then 12 happened, Zach, and we became the reverse Cinderella. We literally all turned into pumpkins. I started to notice every single one of us was looking down, texting, furiously texting back, being on the phone. And I was looking over my friend's shoulders at texts like, where did you put Hudson's soccer bag? You want me to take him to soccer? Well, you didn't leave me his bag. Am I going to a birthday party? Well, what's the address? And people just going back and back. When is the babysitter coming? One of my favorite was my friend's husband, who said, when are you coming home from the parade? But my other favorite was my friend Kate's partner, who asked at noon, do the kids need to eat lunch? And what I realized now is that the hardest thing for me that day was that every single one of those women, not everyone was married to a man, but all of us, every one of those women said to me, I left my partner with too much to do. And they come with me to lunch that day. They left to go find Hudson's soccer bag, to make their kids lunch, to take their perfectly wrapped gift to a birthday party. And that was the day that I finally, my first act of resistance was counting up how many phone calls and texts we received. We had 30 phone calls and 46 texts for 10 women over 30 minutes. So that is the context in which
from their partners.
I realized we had to stop. From their partners. 30 phone calls and 46 texts over 30 minutes.
Of course, I've never sent a text like that. I'm just kidding. I imagine the therapists and others watching, just like my wife and I, sitting down with this, recognizing that word she fault has not really left my brain. My wife is a physics professor at a major university. She has a wonderful career. And yet, before all this, when the child got sick, we have a 2-year-old. When he gets sick, it wasn't even a conversation, I realized. Right. She stayed home. She stayed home. She got someone to cover her classes, and she stayed home. When honestly, I'm sure there's partners who can't, but I could have, and I didn't. It was a real realization for us. So we've gotten really into the specifics of our own lives, We know where this all came from, and now you haven't let the blueberries go yet, and it's risen to get the attention of people like Reese Witherspoon. You developed a whole training, and before we get too far into this, I do want to mention that Eve trains. We haven't really
Yeah.
got into the what it is, but Eve created an incredible training program called Fair Play.
Hmm.
The Fair Play method training and certification. Um, if you're a therapist, a coach, kind of someone who helps people, and you see these kinds of issues in relationships, this is a great training, and there's a link there if you want to check it out. The next cohort starts soon. Thank you, Melissa, for putting it in the chat.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, and if you
And we're
mentioned
not doing that
psychotherapy
many more
worker,
cohorts. I think why we're doing this and
yeah,
why we've done this over the past year and a half was we wanted enough. We were getting enough. We were getting a lot. I mean, an enormous amount of people and DMs and emails and overwhelmed and inundated with people who wanted to see a therapist that worked with fair play. And yeah, I could have sent them to people who had read the book, but we wanted people to really feel comfortable with the gender lens that underlies a lot of these dynamics. So
yeah.
anyway, it's been a really fun uh, program for us, and we have 110 therapists already that have been trained, and the data that they are giving us is just really beautiful in
Mhm,
terms of how this is not a CBT tool, but has a lot of implications like that, where there are ways to check in a very concrete way
mhm,
to make difference. And so let's talk about it. So let's talk about,
yeah,
what is what would you even be trained in? What is this thing?
yeah,
So I think, Zach, as you now know, for me, as trained as a lawyer, the way I look at the law it is almost like psychology, but just at a more macro lens, which is how do you I look the reason why I went into law was because I wanted to change behaviors. And we now know if you don't want people to vote in Georgia, you pass a law. You want people to stop at a stop sign, you pass a law. So I was very interested in the law as a behavior design tool. And so what happened over time is that my specialty in the law became a combination of organizational management. Like I have all my books here, but like this. Oh my God. Like, positive organizational scholarship
oh,
combined with governance, which is a roadmap for how you and mediation.
mhm,
So conflict mediation. So when I worked for families, they were like the HBO show Succession, and you should feel bad for me. But again, a lot of them are probably like your clients too. Uh, it was the kind of place where you walk into a room and every time, second son tries to say anything, dad walks out to go get water, right? These dynamics where you don't know how to organize and make decisions in an organization.
mhm,
So, given that that is my discipline, when things were going really poorly in my own household, I felt my choices at that time were court ordered custody. As my friend said, that was how she got her fairness. Eat, Pray, Love was a very big book at the time. So I could sort of eat, pray, love it out of my marriage. But I had two kids at the time, very young kids. And I'm a single product of a single mother and a very a lot of trauma from my father and my mother's divorce that I've worked through with many therapists through the years. And so what I realized was that there was a third option. And the third option was I could become my own client. And Zach, that's what I did. And I knew that if I asked this question that became the most important question that centered me now for the past 10 years, that question was and is what would happen if we started to treat our homes as our most important organizations? If our home is our most important organization, then it looks very different than one of my favorite quotes was from this amazing beta tester who's now he's elevated to CEO and he's doing amazing things with Fair Play in his company, including paid leave analysis and all these other things that Fair Play did for him. But I remember him saying to me almost 10 years ago, you mean like my house, Eve, where we wait to decide who's taking the dog out right? When it's about to take a piss on the rug. And I said, exactly. I want that, but the opposite. Why is it that we make the same decision, Zach, over and over and over again without having any pre-planning over what that decision is going to be? How is it that you've now decided 10,000 times in a row who's taking the dog out in the moment when you could have 10 years ago decided that Zach does dog days, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and your partner does it Tuesdays, Thursdays? That elimination of decision fatigue is what I do for corporations and for families. So I realized we could do that. So to do that, the secret formula that really fair play is predicated on is a formula of a successful organization. And what I've learned now doing this for 15 years is a successful organization has three things. It has boundaries, systems, and communication. And that's also why I realized I needed therapists, because I can design the system. That's the middle. That's the easy part. And we'll talk about that. But boundaries and communication are really hard. In fact, we surveyed over 1,000 people where I asked them, what is your most important practice? We did it very vaguely. Often we got meditation or exercise, Zach. Not one of the 1,000 people in our survey said communication. And I know you would probably agree with me, but communication is one of the most important practices of our lives. And people don't look at it that way. They look at it very transactionally. So we can go into the boundaries and communication together because you're good at that too. But I'll just explain the system. So the system is really, it's a metaphor. So there's 100 cards. And what these 100 cards represent are all the potential possibilities for what your home as an organization could look like. Doesn't mean they're all in play. And it does not mean that you will be using it as a scorekeeping exercise where you say, you suck, Zach, as you hold one card and your partner's holding 90. And how did you get to that dynamic? You should have known better. No, that's how people could use it if they don't have a trained therapist. But the way that this card deck is supposed to be used is the tool allows you to really understand that the idea of 50-50 makes no sense. We tried that in the 90s and it completely failed. In the 90s, we had something called equally shared parenting, where Zach, it was like, you do sick day one day, then I do sick day the next day, and you do pick up this day, and then I have to do it the next day, and you make this much money, and I have to make the exact same amount of money. It's a to try to get to 50-50 that way is a mind-numbing exercise and failure. Instead, if you focus on perceived fairness, which is a really beautiful study that shows that when two people perceive fairness, it doesn't matter what the actual fairness is. So perceiving fairness is what I care about. And to get there, you needed to get to the system. But this was my big problem, Zach. I could identify all the 100 things that I wanted you to talk about, which would make up your home organization. But the hardest part, Zach, was that women were coming to me saying they were incredibly resentful, and men were saying that they did not feel psychologically safe. And they didn't say it that way, but that's what I was listening for in their home because they didn't know their role and they couldn't do anything right. And input, like on the diaper rash, was not accepted because maybe they didn't do as many diapers, so you were not allowed to speak. So that,
Exactly.
right. And that's not fair to you either, right? Just because you may do less diapers in the old way, yes, because I get the resentment is there. But in the new way, if you were the person holding the diaper card for more of the routine, then the other person should be allowed to voice concern if their child has a rash. So men told me they stopped speaking in their own homes, that they don't talk at all, that they are shut down, so that they're trading in avoidance and then blowups because they can't speak, freely. So all of that came down to the fact that in a system, the big problem was every couple that I was interviewing, this was my first 200 couples in 2011, were saying to me, we both do it. Oh, garbage, we both do it. Diaper changes, we both do it. Oh, groceries, we both do it. So then if you're both doing everything and everything's so great, why are you telling me that your marriage is falling apart? So what I
Mhm.
realized was I had to ask the second most important question that I've ever asked in the past 10 years. And
Mm.
I've now asked it in 17 countries. And it got me to the system. And that question was, instead of saying, who's doing what when I was getting both, the question was, how did mustard get in your refrigerator? And why that question is
Oh,
so great is because condiments are everywhere. So you can
okay.
modify the condiment for the country. But why it's even better was because even LGBTQIA families or single parents, what I started to see, but especially in the hetero cisgender dynamic, was that women were reporting to me that they were the one noticing that their second son, Johnny, only eats his protein if he douses it in French's yellow mustard. So what was so beautiful is that idea of conception. We get paid big bucks for that in the workplace. When you come up with new ideas and you notice things, that's a big piece of our organizational management framework in the workplace. So I was
Mhm.
able to say, okay, that's conception. And then I would hear again from women that they were responsible for monitoring the mustard for when it runs low, and that they were also the one getting stakeholder buy-in from their family for what they needed on the grocery list. Again, they didn't call it stakeholder buy-in, but that's what I was listening for.
Mhm.
And so that's planning. So then I was able to say, okay, I see that there's conception and planning being held by one person. But then what I would hear is, oh, Zach goes to the store. He's the one who
Mhm.
actually shops. I
Mhm.
give him the grocery list. I planned, I monitored the mustard. And Zach, you're bringing home spicy Dijon every time. And you want me to trust you with my living will? You can't even bring home the right type of mustard.
Yeah.
So that's the dynamic that we decided to address with the system. It's about keeping the conception, planning, and execution together with an ownership mindset. And that's really the core crux of what fair play is.
Mhm. So, for those of you maybe just joining, we're here with Eve Rodsky, who wrote this great book called Fair Play, and she has a training upcoming soon. If you mention Psychotherapy Networker, you get a little bit of a nice little discount. The link is in the chat there. Eve is also coming. You're coming all the way to Washington, D.C.
So
for the
excited.
Psychotherapy Networker Symposium, which is if you've never been, it's the greatest psychotherapy conference on the planet, certainly the most fun. We have all the we haven't even actually announced this yet, but you
Oh,
are,
good.
if you're listening, you're the first to know that Eve Rodsky is going to be there keynoting, along with Nedra Tawwab, who wrote a great book on boundaries. And I'm really excited to announce that Alanis Morissette is going to be there with Dick Schwartz, who's the developer of internal family systems therapy. And they're going to be talking about some really exciting, interesting things. So, and several others, kind of the who's who in the clinical world. It's a great time. If you can come, please do. Eve will be there. So, um, interesting to me, you had my wife and I do this deck a little bit differently. I'm just going to go off just for because
Yes.
we only
No,
have
no,
a couple of minutes
please,
here.
please. Yes, I
You
did.
you actually, I actually really liked it. I want to bring it up now. Um, Rather than kind of do the standard, there's a video on Eve's website, by the way, kind of how to do the card deck. So if you go watch
Mhm.
that, it's a really nice 3-minute video. But for complicated couples, yeah, not that we're too complicated, but if there's just a lot of you've never really talked about dividing up tasks or something. My wife and I actually just sat down and we actually spent 3 or 4 hours doing it, going through all the cards and only talking about how we experienced those
Yes.
tasks as children. Talk about why you have some couples do that first before maybe divvying up the tasks.
And I'd love to hear one of you. I want to talk a little bit about that with you. I want to, because
Sure.
I've done that. I've asked you those questions before, but why? Well, actually, that came through therapists. So we beta tested this system for years, Zach. This started in 2011 as a should I do spreadsheet. And then it turned into a system. And then we realized we needed the boundaries and communications around it. And so we actually had a cohort of therapists who were using the tools. And then one them, Dr. Phyllis Cohen, who actually happens also to be my aunt, but is highly trained in analysis. her lens is her postdoc in analysis on top, PhD in psychology. She thought that was an interesting work to use it through analysis framework, how people experience and tell some storytelling around how people experience the cards in their childhood. Because we thought, and I think I now really believe, is why that's a great alternative way to use the cards, is because it gives us a sense of our why. So I'll give you an example from my own life, and then I'll ask you a spot. I'll just pick a card, and then we've
Mhm.
not rehearsed this, so we'll see what Zach says if you're
Yeah.
okay with going off the cuff a little. But
Yeah.
for me, the hardest part of the beta testing years, which was working on my marriage uh, after 2011, when I started to want to develop this system, Zach, was that Seth really, really was on board with CPE. He really was on board with ownership. He thought the reason he was not involved as much was because of what he called nagging and asking him to go to the store, pack the bags with no context. He's a leader who believes there's a lot of servant leadership, and there's a lot of leadership scholarship out there around the notion of context, not control. You give people the ability to have context. You don't control them. We know that has really good outcomes from organizational science. So CPE was great for him. He said, if I can own things, know in advance what I'm owning, you're not going to criticize me because I have to own my mistake. That's a much better way for us to live than these, what I call, instead of nagging, because I think that's a very gendered term, I call it the rats. You don't want to have rat infestation in your home. And the
Okay.
rat infestation is a random assignment of a task. And that was the number one thing. Men, again, in our huge longitudinal study now over 10 years, men never said to me, you are not saying to me in any form of relationship, I don't want to be involved in my kid's life. I don't want to be involved in the nitty gritty of household management. I never heard that. What I heard was, I don't know my role. And so once you know that, then what you can realize is that there's just a lot of beauty in really unpacking the stuff around it. So CPE worked. Seth understood now garbage was his task.
Mhm.
We talked about in advance. That meant taking the little garbages, Zach. It wasn't just the big garbage out. It was putting the liner back in. And I
Mhm.
said, there's about 20 other little bins around the house. You have to dump
Mhm.
the little bins into the big bin and then take those out too. And then know when it's more complicated here in LA than it is in New York. You have to know
Mhm.
when the garbage day is and bring the bins up. So, it's not so easy. But the hard part was I was still his garbage shadow because I had
Right.
not gone over that resentment and the accountability and trust was not there.
Mm.
So what I realized was I was just following him around the kitchen,
Mhm.
just seeing if he was going to do it, waiting for him to disappoint me. And so I realized, well, system's not enough. It's just not enough. The boundaries and communication piece has to sort of be the sandwich. And what that meant was sitting Seth down and saying, okay, we need to come up with a minimum standard of care here. I need to know when the garbage is going out. Is it, I would like it to go out every hour. And Seth is like, okay. And that also wasn't working. And finally, the breakthrough was, and this is what I write about in Fair Play and what the training is about, is that similar to how you use the exercise. When you can talk about your why, it really changes everything and it allows you to set your minimum standard of care. So for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
it was getting vulnerable and saying to Seth, this is really weird. We've never talked about garbage, but I'm going to tell you what it felt like to experience garbage in my household.
Right. Right.
And the way to experience garbage in my household was that we never took it out. It was spilling on the floor. We had cockroaches and water bugs everywhere. My mother was a single mother. She's a professor of social work. They gave her the night classes because social workers always got the short shrift of when they could get the classrooms. And she left me to take care of my disabled brother alone. And so my experience of garbage is going to get my disabled brother water when I'm putting him to bed and closing my eyes, turning on the light, waiting for the cockroaches and water bugs to scatter before I was able to enter the kitchen.
Hmm.
That is not something Seth knew about me. What I
Right.
didn't know about him was that he slept on pizza boxes in his fraternity. And so he didn't care about garbage.
Mhm.
So either what you could do is, as a therapist, you can say, well, the person who cares about it more, take it back. Well, no, that's a terrible way to do it, because then the resentment builds again.
Mhm.
Instead, you can come up with a minimum standard of care, which is what we do in medicine and law. And that minimum standard of care for Seth became that garbage was going to go out once a day.
Mhm.
And he knew that I cared about it, and he knew why I cared about it.
Mhm.
So, Zach, let's play.
That's
I'm going to
good.
just shuffle, and then let's just stop on a card, and then
Okay.
we'll see what
You,
your experience was.
great. I'm into it.
Okay, let me know. Tell me when to say stop.
Oh, stop.
Okay, let's see what we
Just pick
have.
one for me.
All right, I'm picking one for you.
Okay.
Okay, let's see what we got. We got weekend plans.
Okay.
So, okay, tell me. So this is how we would be practicing together. So tell
Yeah.
me about your weekends. Do you remember weekends growing up? Were your parents together? Was there joint custody? Who planned your weekends? Do you remember what you did on your
Yeah.
weekends? Anything you want to tell me about your weekends?
Yep. So I'll just kind of cut to the chase here that weekends for me as a child were usually pretty stressful and structured.
Mm.
We were all involved in sports. We had church on Sunday mornings, and so it was usually me trying to get out of things to just relax. My dad worked really hard during the week as an electrician, and he would relax. But my mother was really driving the train, getting everybody everywhere all the time. And so that was my weekends, very structured and stressful. We'll
Well, first of
summarize
all,
it.
I feel like I know you so much better, even literally from that 20 seconds. I know about your
Yeah,
dad being an electrician. I know
yeah,
your parents were together. And
yeah.
again, it's a psychologically safe way to share, because I don't feel like I'm going to leave this as an oversharing experience
Mm,
where then, we don't want to interact anymore because someone gets regret from oversharing, which is always an issue. These are great psychologically safe ways to have conversations, even if it's not
mhm,
with people who are in the dyad, like you said.
mhm.
But I love it so much because we just picked that. I mean, we could have had robust conversations about anything, but I'll just go a little bit deeper and ask you, in that, what did you play? What sport did you play?
Uh, a lot of them, football, baseball primarily. I was way too
And
old for football though, but I did play.
you play, but baseball and football were the ones you played.
Right.
And did you
Yeah.
have to play that throughout your life? Did you play until you went to college, or?
I quit halfway through high school to play guitar with my buddies in a band, which was phenomenal. It was one of the best experiences of my life. Um,
And so you
so
finally
yeah, up
got the
until
courage. You had basically it took you to like halfway through high
yeah,
school to get the courage or the voice to be able to speak up and say, I don't want to do this anymore.
right, yeah. That was a little bit me deciding I was done. I'd gone far enough. Um, but certainly, it was a tough decision. Honestly, coming from a sports family, my dad and my uncle were big baseball players. Even
Oh,
went on to
wow.
semi-pro, and
Wow.
so for me to leave sports was difficult, I think, in some ways. But so it was a tough transition.
Right. And as we know, my whole second book is about how we don't want as
Yep.
parents to put the unfulfilled dreams of ourselves on our children. So we could have a whole other unicorn space discussion
Yep.
about that. But I think what's so beautiful about even just learning about your weekends is that even if you're in a relationship, you may have ancillary heard these stories or not, but I know from now my data over a decade from studying couples that most of the time when I do that exercise with them, the other person in the dyad had not heard that story.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it's fascinating to me, or they hadn't heard it from that perspective. They had
Yeah.
heard about from their parent that they were a great player, but they didn't hear the reluctance. And so then if you don't unpack it, then what ends up happening is either you repeat the same patterns. So
Hmm.
you assume your children are going to be football and baseball players,
Hmm.
or it's the opposite, where you want a really relaxed, unstructured weekend, and your partner is very confused by why you don't want to participate in the general activities that most families are doing.
Hmm.
And the problem is that we end up then fighting over why didn't you forgot to register them for soccer?
Yeah.
But maybe secretly you didn't register for the soccer because there's some resistance there that you're not
Hmm.
sure that you want them to play sports. And so
Right.
when we get to take it to the next level down of our why, garbage needs to go out. The frequency was the issue of the minimum standard of care. But other things like extracurricular sports, what you want to do together on the weekends once a baby comes, even such things as in-laws,
Mhm.
it makes a really big difference if you're having these types of conversations first. And that's why I said to Zach, sometimes it's more fun for me to get the data of what it feels like. And so I'll ask you that too. What does it feel like to start having these conversations with a partner? Was it interesting? Did you learn
That was
anything
great.
about your partner that you hadn't known before?
Yeah, I mean, without getting into too many details,
Yeah,
it was unbelievably fruitful to have these conversations. You think as a couple, you should have conversations about your dreams and goals and
right.
your deep values and, politics and society and how you raise a family. All great conversations. But equally great and equally meaningful to us was who did dinners when you were growing up?
Yeah.
How was food prepared and who did it? That was an amazing. Who cleaned the house? Who took out the trash? Um, these kinds of who paid the bills? How were finances discussed in your home as a child?
Hmm.
Incredibly fruitful conversations, just as important, I think, as some of those deeper
I,
ones.
and the good news is, oftentimes you can get to some of the deeper values conversations from having these
Yep,
conversations, or you can
yep,
ask about them. And so Seth and I really tried to do that with a little bit of extracurricular sports by saying, instead of deciding what sports our kids want to play in the fair play method, let's decide instead what values we care about them to
yep,
get.
yep.
So we both decided that the team aspect of sports was really, really important to us. And not in the baseball way where it's sort of an individual sport masquerading as a team sport, but we really wanted our kids' success to be in the hands of someone else's success.
Hmm.
And there's not that many sports actually that are like that. You have volleyball, you have basketball, but it really started to help us decide which sport our kid was going to play, because we decided our most important value was that our children's success was in the hands of someone else's success.
Hmm.
And so, of course, golf, tennis, baseball, those are also great places to spend time. But we decided those were not our primary sports because of the values we
Mhm.
had around extracurricular sports.
Yep.
Now, it takes you a long time to get through your value system of every single of the 100 cards. But some of them, you may not be experiencing at the moment, like death. But even talking about your values around death, do you want to be cremated? Do you have a religious view around it? So I do think that that's the beauty of these conversations, is
Mhm.
what we're doing here. What Zach and I are doing is really saying the most important piece of balancing work and home and personal lives is not the logistical how or what. It's really understanding the why. And
Mm.
it's embarrassing to talk about garbage and to say, or to add, when we first started doing it, for some reason, it just felt so embarrassing. Like, this is so weird. We're having a conversation about garbage, or we're having a conversation about dishes. But I think when you start realizing that so many of the core memories of these domestic labor home organization cards are tied to our humanity,
Mhm.
then the stakes become higher.
Mhm.
And that's the beauty of the therapists that we see working with the fair play system, is they get to such high stakes. And typically what we're hearing is that they're able to get to the high stakes in a way that doesn't take such high emotion, low cognition conversations, but really gets to the stakes through storytelling as an ancillary tool in their practice. So that's what's
Mhm.
been really fun. It's been really fun for me to get that data.
I know as the therapist watching, we're always looking for really good tools. And in couples therapy particularly, we've become very focused on emotion and
Okay.
expressing sort of unmet needs and attachment needs. Um, this is this is a more concrete version of that. And so check it out. Eve, you spent 45 minutes with us at Psychotherapy Networker, and I know much more is coming. Um, so thank you for your time. Um, you're doing this obviously because you care a lot about therapists who are, every
I do.
therapist you reach, you're reaching 20, 30 clients or more over a course of a year, maybe many more. So we're really appreciative that you have been wanting to include us in this whole fair play movement. Again, if you're a therapist or coach or pastor or rabbi or something who wants to learn more, there is a training. It's coming up. She has a lot of cohorts coming up. There it is. If you mention Psychotherapy Networker and this broadcast, you get a little discount. You can also join us in DC or online for the
I cannot
symposium in
wait
month.
for that. That'll
It's
be
going to be
so fun.
exciting. But Eve, thank you so much for your time explaining fair play, what it is. I hope the therapists watching see a client or two that this would be really useful with. So try it out. You don't need to take the training, I don't think, but I
No,
don't. I mean,
the book and the
please
cards and
do.
the checklist, there's
Yeah.
a lot of free resources online as well. And
Yeah.
then we're starting to put out new resources for alternative family structures, like
Great.
single parents, LGBTQIA families, military spouses, a
Great.
spouse who's in the ER who maybe can't do as many of the daily grind tasks.
Mhm.
So we are, so just check out Fair Play Life. If you sign up for the newsletter, the tools, we often release, all these free tools on the
Great.
newsletter.
And actually, our producer behind the scene here, Melissa, her husband's coming back from deployment after many, many months this weekend.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Well,
And
Melissa,
we were actually
it's a
talking
hard
about this.
time. It's a hard time to reintegrate. And so maybe it's a good time to listen to the audiobook while you're driving or something,
Yeah.
because we know we want to support you here in that reintegration.
Yep. That's a big, big time. So thanks for calling that out, Eve.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for listening and learning about this new method. I'm really excited about it. My wife and I have truly been using it and doing it. This isn't just marketing. We only do things at Networker that we get excited about, and Eve got us really excited. So and then that's why you're part of the Networker community, I think, is because you trust us that we're hopefully bringing you valuable things that are going to help you as a therapist and a person. So thanks everyone for joining. Eve, have a wonderful
Thank
long
you,
Labor Day
Zach. Have a
weekend,
great long weekend.
and we'll see
And
you
everyone
all.
stay healthy and safe.
Thank
Bye.
you.